So while we are on the topic of building more efficient, cost-effective and sustainable infrastructure projects of high quality through the power of technology, it would be pertinent to learn from those players who have already been there and done that. Globally, what industry practices have been adopted and how these practices have delivered results on ground, what were the hits and misses? All of these can be great resources to study so as to have a better rollout of BIM processes. To elaborate further on this subject, I would like to invite Mr. Adam Matthews, Head of Strategy and Engagement for the Digital Construction International DCI program, Connected Places Catapult UK. And may I also request Mr. Mike Turpin, Global Digital Team Technical Advisor, Connected Places Catapult UK. Ladies and gentlemen, can we have a big round of applause?
Over to you. Thank you so much. Oh, good morning. Thank you so much for that presentation that you just provided, which gave such a lot of detail on how CPWD is, in fact, very much an exemplar for India, I think, a great role model. What I'm going to talk about is the interaction between the public sector and private sector. I'm going to try and complement your presentation to a degree to look at the experience that we've had around the world, and I'm going to focus on, in particular, some of the UK story to describe some of the challenges, actually, to work together between public sector, private sector, how that motivation and communication can occur, and also, in particular, how you can transition from national level down to an organization level. Interestingly, in your presentation, you referenced your projects and how you'd started to work on pilot projects. We'll also touch on how to transition from 5, 10 projects to thousands of projects as well. And Mike will pick up the story in particular as a preview of the training course in which we're looking to provide and work together with Niti Aayog and other collaborators here in India to help, with the support of the British High Commission, I should say, to help support the development of a training course that will hopefully help you in that journey. So, to begin, clearly you understand the broader agenda of this in terms of providing better quality infrastructure, public infrastructure for our citizens and for our economic growth and environmental benefit as well. One of the challenges that we recognize is that this is a very complex industry, a very much a siloed industry in many ways, and a very traditional one. And so communication is going to be a lot of what I focus on in this discussion, and providing signals. And what I mean by signals are the way in which we transmit an idea to others and the way that we motivate others to change as well is a very important part of this effort that you've described, and I'm going to touch on that in a moment. I should say that although I'm going to talk specifically about the UK, I'm going to try to give you an example of how this works, how the national level works and interacts with the organisation level, how the private sector work with the public sector, and how those signals between each other can be made most effective. While I'm going to use the UK example, I should, as I mentioned yesterday in the discussion, that we've had a great deal of experience. We've been fortunate actually to work with a huge number of countries. First of all with the EU, which was about 20 odd countries that we worked with there between 2013 through to about 2020 primarily, and still are very much connected with that group as well. Latin America, that undertook at a tremendous rate a huge uptick in the adoption of BIM, led by public sector involvement, and that was really critical, that public sector motivation. And as I mentioned again yesterday, we've had some really positive experiences here in broader context of Asia, and most recently with Vietnam, and we're there again next week, in fact. So that's a little bit about our expertise and experience. I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but I thought it'd be helpful just to show you the length of time, more than anything else, just the fact that This has got a long duration to transition an industry which is one of the most traditional. It was really interesting to hear from our colleagues that CPWD is one of the oldest ministries of the Indian government. In many ways, that's no surprise because fundamentally, construction is one of the oldest industries. It's a very traditional industry and it takes a lot of thought to change it. In fact, I could go back from 2010 further another 70 years because 70 years ago, we recognized at the beginning of our journey that many reports had come forward to say the industry needs to be better. There needs to be more collaboration in the industry. The industry needs to digitize and it needs to modernize itself. All these reports, great reports, academic reports, government reports, all of these reports were produced. I forget the number. I think it was around 100 official reports that said pretty much the same thing. But the real key difference was, as I alluded to yesterday, in 2010 was the first time that government said, okay, we need to change. If we want a different answer, if we want a different response, we need to provide a different question. And that was the beginning of something that we described as the intelligent client, the movement towards becoming an intelligent client, which fundamentally led to all of this activity. Now, I'm not going to go through all of that. I'll pick up a couple of highlights for you using a central model, a central construct, which will help to describe the big picture at the national level and the big picture of BIM rollout at the organization level. And it will frame and touch upon many of the ideas that you've just described as well. So, I said slightly tongue-in-cheek yesterday that although we had a BIM mandate, it wasn't really about BIM and it wasn't really a mandate. What it was about was information management. We saw a lot at the time of BIM being described and understood as purely a technology activity, which technology, don't get me wrong, is very important, of course. In fact, it's crucial. We couldn't be doing some of these things without the underlying technologies, and some of which was just showed a moment ago. But it is important to recognize that this is about transforming the way we deal with information. And it starts again with the client. What I just said, the client has got to become much more aware of their information needs. And this isn't a skill that we automatically have. It needs to be a muscle we develop progressively. The second half of that, of course, is about this word mandate. Now, I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But a mandate in the UK sense means a legal imperative, something that you must do. It's a very strong word, very powerful word. But we had an agreement between a collective group of clients that agreed to the strategy that we'd produced as a group, hosted by government, but working with industry. So that's a really subtle difference between the idea of an agreement collectively to do something that was being recommended. It was called a mandate, and the term stuck, and Mike and I still use that term today. We use the word mandate, but in the legal sense it wasn't quite. So in particular here, unfortunately, it's not highlighted, but it's referencing the fact that it was about the information. It's in brackets, but it's the important part of this sentence, which is to say that it was really about the transmission of project and asset information in an electronic form. And that was required by 2016. The important part of that also is not only the data transfer piece, but also the date. We often need a date to be compelled, and I saw that again. I'm going to pull out where I can remember the points of the CPD presentation, which is to have a date. We're driven by dates. That's how we're wired. We tend to not write a report unless we have a date to do that report. We'll find 10 other things to do, but we know we've got a report next week. Mike and I just realized we've got a meeting next week we've got to prepare for. Okay, that drives us, doesn't it? It provides motivation. So a mandate provides motivation to do something by a certain time with a set of collective outputs. A brief word on this, that's as UK outcomes behind there. It's very important to understand the why. This was our why. It's very important because, again, going back to how we're wired as people, we like to understand why we're doing something. Yeah, we like to understand what we've got to do and how to do it. Yes, absolutely. But our internal motivations comes from something deeper, typically, something that's usually bigger than us. And again, I'm going to refer back to the inspirational vision that you've set out at CPWD, that you need that anchor. That means something bigger than ourselves individually. Again, we're all the same. We all need that motivation, something to inspire us that's bigger than us, something that we can get behind. Now for us, this was very much, and it's still very much the same, although this was produced something like about 12, 13 years ago. It was about lowering emissions, improving our carbon agenda, our consumption of carbon, our use of carbon, being more mindful of waste, for example, lowering our costs, improving the time to deliver projects, and something again which resonated certainly with some of the presentations yesterday is around improving our capability from a world perspective, and that again came up in, I think, Abhishek's presentation about that connection to the world and being able to export ourselves. So this is the construct that we're going to use today. This is just a preview, so we'd love to have a chat with you, love to talk to you, get your ideas on this. As I mentioned, with the support of the British High Commission here today, we are being engaged to provide a training course that will help the public sector introduction of BIM at an organisation level. And this is part of what we're going to show you today, just very quickly. Obviously, we've only got 20 minutes or so. But we'll just show you a few pieces of that might be helpful. With any construct like this, what we're trying to do is create a very simple model to bring things together to make it understandable and actionable. I'll talk a little bit about this from a national perspective and how it related to the UK, and I'm going to just give you a few examples, and then Mike will pick up the baton or the microphone and carry that story on into how this rolls out into an organisation level. So this idea is something, and I should just, by the way, say that this has been tested with all those countries, 20 odd countries. It came out of work that we did in the UK, with Europe, so it's been a collective production, this idea. So it starts off with leadership, providing leadership, which again, I'm going to come back to elements of Abhishek's presentation yesterday and a presentation from our colleagues at CPWD, which is about providing clarity, providing a strategy, understanding what's driving this, having a vision, having goals. These are all things that need to be in place. It's called leadership. And we need to have not only a vision, but a strategy of how we're going to get there. And I'll briefly show an example of that in a moment as well. At the bottom here, you can see the importance of a sponsor, somebody who actually can represent and embody the direction that you're trying to go in. And again, as people, we all recognize we need somebody to look at as embodying that change, that call for change. Again, it's something within us that we know and recognize. Funding, I think we could maybe say, rather than a funded program of change, we could refer to it as resourced. That might be a better word. Funding can mean many different things, but ultimately what we recognize here is that change doesn't just happen. It needs people, as our colleagues from CPWD represented. They embody that change. They are the ones that are talking and meeting with people, putting things in place that need to therefore help others work. I mentioned about the mandate, which is part of this piece at the bottom, and I just wanted to really underline and underscore the point that a mandate isn't something you can necessarily enforce upon people, although some countries have it as a legislative action. So in Vietnam, in Peru, in Brazil, one or two other places, it is actually a legal requirement by a certain date to deliver certain types of deliverables, obviously related to BIM. But you do need to create buy-in to that. I think is when it's most powerful is that you get buy-in from industry, and this is where I'm going to touch on the public sector, private sector, and buy-in from the public sector, because ultimately it's going to be the public sector that will help this, will make it or break it. I have to say this is, our experience from doing this type of conversation and having these exchanges with many countries. One of the fundamental things is that the public sector can play such an important role, but equally if they're not bought into it or not engaged, then equally it can slow it down. So really having that support on the public sector side. The way we did it, by the way, in the UK, just to give an example, is we had about 8 different central public procurers, large public procurers in the UK come together and agree to the strategy that we'd put in place and say, yes, we will do this. Over the next 5 years, we will put this in place into our public procurement and into our skills and into our projects. And that was a very important moment that we had that buy-in, so that we had that legitimacy. That's a really key word, isn't it? Legitimacy. On the right-hand side, again, I saw this in the conversations yesterday and today, is having a very clear codification of what is it you want to change? How are you planning to work as a standard practice? And it was great to see, thank you for sharing the reference to the ISO 19650, which provides a very balanced, neutral definition of BIM from the public sector and the private sector side. It describes the exchange and the interplay of information between what the client demands and how they can demand information, and how the supply side will deliver that information for the project. And it gives a very balanced view, meaning it's good for infrastructure, it's good for buildings, it works for very large projects, it works for projects the size of my house extension, very small projects, it scales, and it's non-proprietary, which is important. Again, another point that was made earlier. So having that collaborative framework is important. Just on the legal word there, I think this may be referenced, I may have missed it, but I think it was helpful to note that we saw a lot of barriers in the early days to the use of BIM, in particular around intellectual property and copyright issues, because with a dumb drawing, a sketch, there's little concern that could be stolen. There is some concern, but there's limited. With a model, the likes of which we just saw on the screen a moment ago, they have a huge amount more information. They have building material types, for example, and you can see how it's constructed. So that's more easily replicated. And so there was a legal review right at the beginning of our program to look at what changes would be made to or required to the legal documents in order to protect architects and engineers and their intellectual property. So again, just a word on an example there. A final word on this right-hand side of putting in place the codification of the change is about learning outcomes. Now, this has got a couple of references. One is that when you want to build scale, you can't do everything. We were a small team in the UK, a change team, but we wanted to engender a larger change across the whole society of construction, including academia in particular. And so we created a learning outcomes framework. We were saying, don't develop a course like, we weren't going into the detail of this is how you should develop your course. We were saying your course could align to these outcomes. So we would set the outcomes, but not describe how it was to be delivered. So again, just to get a thought around creating outcome-centric ideas rather than necessarily defining things and how they should be done, because that creates space for innovation. I've heard the word innovation a number of times over the past day or so, and it's a really important one. You don't want to constrict things too much either. You don't want to handcuff yourself to a particular idea, because things will change inevitably over time. So you want to be clear about outcomes which tend to change less and be more flexible on the actual detail of how that outcome is made. Communications this is a really important one, and you know, this should be kind of flashing on this slide if we could, because communication, this is a communication exercise fundamentally. It's a lot about confidence, it's a lot about making people feel part of a change and making them feel part of that change in a way that they can own it fundamentally. You know, you want to create ownership. So a quick example of what we did there, or one of the things that we did, was that we created small groups of people. We would enable a group of, for example, I'm going to reference our colleagues here from CDCP, that are very much like the BIM Alliance in the UK. So that's a group of industry professionals that would like to work together, understand this change, how to be part of the change, work with government, take direction from government, inform government. And it's those groups, we created, I think, about 40 groups: BIM for retail, BIM for clients, BIM for water. There's a whole list of these groups that we helped to create. And a country the size of India, you know, clearly that's going to need to be regionally dispersed as well. So that's a really important area. And we probably put about, I'm going to guess that maybe 25%, 20%, 25% of our fund that we had from government, which was about 5 million or 7 million US dollars, 7 million US dollars, which in infrastructure terms is the rounding error of the overrun of a typical project. The rounding error, you know, you missed off a little bit and you just, you know, so that's 7 million and it made a tremendous difference. And this is a bit random, sorry, but I remember meeting with a colleague. He was an engineer, he was about to retire actually, and we were on the London Underground, the tube, and he said that the UK government BIM programme was one of the best things that government had ever done for the industry apart from health and safety measures. This was around, I would guess on that timeline, it was about 2015, I guess we met Rob, his name was, and I think that was quite remarkable for me because Rob, I knew, was quite sceptical. He wasn't somebody easily given to compliments, and he said that the UK government programme was one of the most important things that UK government had done apart from health and safety. And I thought about that and the investment, which was, you know, hardly anything. He wasn't talking about the massive investment on HS2, which, by the way, that's done something for the industry. He was thinking about change of the industry, and I thought that was really quite important. So don't underestimate the value that this will do for India, but also it's actually quite small in terms of the investment in change, really, when we think about infrastructure projects, 1.4 trillion, I think it was, dollars of investment. So that's communication. The only reason we're doing these three things at the national level, and Mike will just touch a moment on the organisation level, is because of the top thing. If we had a magic button, all we would want to do is press it and have the top grow, increase from the centre to the top. That's all we really want. We want to build capacity. Capacity on the public sector, capacity on the industry side. Capacity around the transfer and exchange of information to make better decisions. That's it. We're just trying to make better decisions. And really, if we could do one thing, it'd just be that. These three things here, they're all trying to drive that, because it's that will drive the outcomes. Not 5 projects, not 10 projects done very well, hundreds of projects, thousands of projects. That will drive the impact at the national scale or the organisation scale. So that's what you're trying to drive at the top there. I'm going to shift gears now a little bit and just show that on a timeline. I'm conscious of the time. I want to make sure that Mike has some time more specifically around the organisation level aspects and reference to the training course in particular. This is then pulling that diamond shape together and putting it across time. Now the reason that we've used phases, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, is because this could be 3 years, 5 years. I think Chile's plan was 4 years, I believe. The UK plan started as 4 years, went to 5 years quite quickly, and ended up being about 8 or 9 years, as you saw on the previous chart. So this can stretch and grow. The important idea is that there's a role for government, which is the blue bits, or the public sector organisation, as we just saw from CPWD. And around it are activities largely driven by industry. A lot of this is really about helping provide signals to industry. The diamond shape is just the thing around the outside here, just to explain it. Now, I will just pick up a couple of these points, but I want to have Mike come on up and talk with you about a few things. Beginning here is the idea of a business case. Now, what we mean by an investment case is, why are you doing this? What is the return you're expecting at the national level or the organisation level? And by the way, this also translates to a private sector organisation. This is pretty generic as a model, we've observed. The reason why it's laid out like this is because it's in architectural terms. If you're an architect, you understand the term of general arrangement. So it's not a very specific plan. It's not saying this node connects with this node. It's a general arrangement. It has flexibility within it, but it gives you a sense of mass and direction. And the top right corner, it's called a sunray diagram or a sunburst diagram, is because in the top right corner, that's your goal. That's where you are trying to get to. And again, this is different for every country and every context, but that's the general approach. After you've set out some drivers, your business case, your motivation, then we come to the first milestone, which, as we just referenced, is this idea of a mandate. Now, again, the term is quite a strong term, but it's giving a deadline. We so need it as people to have deadlines and have clarity about, well, what do we need to be by that point? What is it that we're trying to achieve by, in our case, it was 2016. Around it, we have communication, of course, activities to build networks of people, regions of people, to work with academia, to do a lot of communication. Communicate early and communicate often. It's the oldest saying in communications, but, it's true. Communicate early and communicate often. Build that buy-in and support from people. Projects, develop learning from projects right in the middle there on the screen around capacity building. Projects, early projects can then inform learning about your standards development, because standards development can take quite a long time. So you need to then test ideas and then pull them back into that right-hand side of the diamond, which is at the bottom of the screen here on the right, the development of the collaborative framework. Test things, try things. It didn't work, okay, we need to try that a little bit differently and then codify that change into the framework itself. Okay, this is, as we said, in a movie sense, a teaser or a preview of the training course. I'm going to now invite Mike up just to talk through then the transition to the organisation level. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, Adam, and good morning, everyone. So it's great already to see kind of over the last day or so what you guys have been doing, seeing the progress and what's going on. And it's great to kind of hear a bit from Adam there around some of the UK story, and I think what we've been saying there is around, we've been through this, we've done it in the UK, and we've learned a lot of the lessons, and I think to highlight that timescale that Adam spoke through, this did take some time. There were a lot of hurdles, and we look back now and say that, okay, the UK's got to a level with BIM, it's used on a lot of projects, the government's got the buy-in, we've got the mandate, and it was great, but there were a lot of those challenges along the way that we've learnt from doing with other countries. So now I just want to highlight a little bit around what we do with other countries, how we work with our program now, and how we deliver that with some of the training and working with organisations and at national level with governments. So we've got national level, we've got organisational level, and we've got project level of how we tend to kind of break down the considerations of the implementation of BIM. And obviously, when we're looking at national level, we're looking at these government programs, we're looking at ministries and how they're kind of implementing this, but as a whole level. And we're looking at the standards, the implementation of the ISO 19650 standards, which have been mentioned over the last couple of days. We're looking at policies, and again, this comes around mandates and driving the entire industry in a country in a direction. And I'll touch a little bit in a moment around the courses we've developed and the support we deliver at that national level. But we also consider and work at the organisational level, and this is really important at the organisational level because the national level will set the scenes and it will set the direction and the outcomes, and the benefit will be there at the national level. But it's the organisational level which is going to make the change happen. We need the organisations to drive things forwards. The organisations control and deliver the projects. And obviously, importantly, I'm not going to kind of skip over the project level, which is massively important. And it was great to hear around some of the pilot projects, and I think we'll see some of the projects today as well. Those projects need to be in place. The pilot projects need to build some of that capacity and feed back to the organisations. Another point I'll mention on here is, again, we work in countries at the national level, we work at the organisational level, and we support the project level. And some of these are not just one, then the other, then the other. So you need a national level, but the organisational level can also happen at the same time. And the organisational level changes and implementation should feed back and work with the national level, and the national level should feed down and work with the organisational level. Likewise with the projects and pilot projects feeding back into that organisational level change. Okay. So Adam mentioned around the UK story, the development, and specifically looking at the diamond and that plan and the need for leadership, the need for building capacity, the need for communities and a strategic framework. As you can see, this has developed over quite a long period of time with our national level programme initially in the UK. We then realised again the importance, as well as the national level, of having that organisational buy-in. So again, those early days we had various ministries, our Ministry of Justice, Department of Health, Department for Education. We had to go through, and some of the training course content and structure, I'll show you in a moment, was developed with those organisations, and we had to sit down with those organisations. They needed to understand why BIM was important in their context, what they were going to get out of BIM, why should they make the investment, what was the benefits they were going to get back, and why did they need this to deliver the future. And moving forwards, obviously we're talking about the future for infrastructure. These organisations all know they needed change. So we developed it at a national level, we developed it in the UK at that organisational level. And then this expanded, as Adam mentioned yesterday, with some of our international work. We developed and worked on this methodology regionally with the European BIM Task Group. We've worked on this with other countries, with Chile at that national level. We've worked on this across other countries, down the bottom there, Vietnam, Indonesia, Brazil, Mexico, also with the United States at that organisational level as well as the national level. So this has been tested and developed over time. At the national level, I say we need to work with countries, and it's about having, I emphasise some of what Adam said there around the idea of a mandate, and whether a mandate is a legal mandate, whether it's a statement of intent, having that date, making that kind of big announcement, developing that scale, that's really what that national level is all about. Providing the leadership, giving a date, giving a drive, and again, as Adam said, trying to make this change. We're trying to get from a selection of projects, 5 projects, 10 projects, 50 projects. We need to get to thousands of projects. We need to change the way infrastructure is delivered. And this national training course, we've delivered in a variety of ways. We deliver face-to-face in country. We deliver remotely, online. We've done e-learning, etc. but all focused around the same thing. It's around the national level understanding the benefits to the public sector, what that change means, what impact and outcomes BIM is really driving towards, and developing a bit of that vision and BIM strategy for a country. Again, what case they're making, moving into that business case, as Adam mentioned, around making sure the resources are in place for that leadership perspective, and implementing the change in terms of mobilizing this to say, if we're going to do this, we need to stop talking about what we're planning to do, put it into practice, drive it forwards, and that needs that leadership piece to facilitate the communities, the communication, the capacity building, and the development of the framework. So this national level course, I say, is all about supporting that development of the business case, the programme, and working towards that turning point and that leadership to develop what we're doing. Okay. So we formulate and work at that national level, making that change, but to set the strategy, to set the vision, to create a mandate and a policy at a national level achieves a certain level, but it's really the organisations that need to take this and drive this forwards. So we've developed around this BIM for public sector organisations. Again, those ministries who are doing this, those ministries who are putting BIM into practice, and those are the ones who are going to see the benefits and outcome of the BIM implementation. I'll show you this diagram, and it's split in terms of the green we've got at the top of workshops, and some of the deliverables down the bottom, and we segment this usually down into a kind of time period where we kind of walk through on a step-by-step basis. The training courses here are not just about talking and explaining a concept, but understanding a way of working and developing a plan for BIM, which takes place over time. It's not something we can do and achieve in an afternoon in a room. It needs consideration. It needs to expand into the organisation. Sometimes with some of these courses as well, the audience will change, and it's not just about changing BIM in the organisation for a technical team of BIM implementation people, but it's also expanding and making sure that brings in the HR and human resources. It makes sure we bring in the legal teams and the contractual teams, and making sure this is integrated into that organisation's process so that BIM is sustainable moving forwards. So our BIM for Organisation course looks at elements of the kind of current state, and we do diagnosis around the current state, process mapping, understanding some of the challenges in the way projects are delivered at the moment, working out some of that kind of vision and business case in terms of what we're doing, and really linking this back to the goals and objectives of an organisation. And that's really where BIM is. BIM is a tool. BIM is a tool, and we need a direction to face that tool and try and get an outcome with this. So the BIM for Organisations is saying, why is that organisation implementing BIM? What are they trying to do with that tool? And how can we kind of change the way we implement it, slightly change the framework to make sure we get the best outcomes. And then, as I say, in the blue, what we do is we work through a series of workshop activities to practically get to some deliverables, and for that organisation to develop its strategic principles, for it to develop a business case and a plan and a roadmap, again following what Adam presented in terms of that diamond structure and the sunray and the roadmap, having a plan, having something that can come away from this training course and say, yes, we know what we need to do tomorrow, next week, next month, and how we're going to make this happen. So I think that's really important with these courses, is around developing that. And I've got a selection of images here of, again, where we've delivered this in person. So we've got some examples here from Vietnam, from the United States, from Chile, and looking at how kind of getting together, getting the correct people together, considering what's going on, and particularly looking at this image up here in the top right, as Adam showed with that diamond diagram there, considering what have we done to date in terms of leadership, And in most cases, and we've seen a lot over yesterday and this morning, India has done some great stuff around BIM. It's done things in terms of capacity building, it's done things in terms of leadership. Obviously some of the stuff we saw yesterday from Niti around the developer leadership there. Communication, and in terms of the framework. So some things have been done, but there's a consideration of what do we need to do next? How do we develop that into a plan? And how do we push this forwards? So again, just a few examples of how we've delivered that in those countries. And I'll further go on to highlight something that Adam mentioned to you yesterday morning in his presentation around the global BIM network and the information collection which we've put together. So this is a website address at the bottom there where you can go to and find information. So on the back of these training courses, we can deliver a plan and we can kind of give examples, and the information collection helps us by providing evidence and artifacts and resources which you can go and find. So the information collection actually now has over 500 articles and artifacts. And importantly, on the refinement of a search on here, of those 500 documents and reports and roadmaps, we can segment them. So if you're interested in public leadership, we've got 118 resources around public leadership, explaining public leadership, and that will include mandates, it will include roadmaps and strategies from 68 countries around the world. Again, if you're interested in capability and capacity building, something obviously we've talked about a lot yesterday and today, there's a lot of resources on there around that capacity building. And there's also things like templates if you're interested in employers' information requirements and BIM execution plans. There's templates available there so we can see how BIM has been implemented by different national level and organisational level changes around the world. So I really emphasise kind of going to that website and checking out some of those resources, and something we do as part of the training we deliver. And to really kind of summarise on that point, obviously it's great to be working with you, and something we'll be doing over the next couple of months is developing this foundational level India public sector training module, delivering this as an e-learning BIM training module. So this is in development. I'd say please get in touch. We will obviously follow up more on this as we develop it. Get in touch with ourselves or Shobik, and we look forward to kind of following up on that one and sharing more for the next couple of months as we develop that. But hopefully again that can support that capacity building. That will, as everything that myself and Adam have presented on the BIM for organisations and the national level training and that methodology and the development of this across all of those international countries, will all feed into this training. So hopefully will help you kind of get on a good start with your BIM programme there. Okay. So with that, I'll say thanks for listening. Look forward, welcome to any questions, and great to speak with you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. May I request you to just be on stage with us for a moment longer, and may I also request Mr. Matthews to join us on stage. And now may I request Ms. Elizabeth Atwell, Head of Infrastructure and Urban Development from British High Commission, to hand over the memento to you. Can we have a big round of applause for our speakers here?